can you tell me your name and then so I can edit that into the theme song?
Steven.
And Alan talking about movies. They may be best friends, but they always disagree.
Steven.
And Alan, I seen that.
Can you tell me about your website?
Yeah. Well, it's been up since 2007. I actually initially wasn't even like the web host or the admin or anything like that. It was run by Ryan Haas. He works on video games. He's over on the North Carolina side of the US. But he had the site up and I was just, curious about the film. I had grown up with it. And I wanted to look up any material I could, and there really wasn't anything out there other than this website run by Ryan. And it was a small community, and I kind of joined it, got involved, and over time I'm like, you know what, there's so much more we can do here. And after corresponding with Ryan, and we just started reaching out, and it was building upon itself to the point that we were interviewing someone new pretty much every weekend.
What is it about Super Mario Brothers that has captured your and this other guy Ryan's attention so much that you've dedicated a lot of time and effort to it?
Well, speaking for myself, I have grown up with the games. I played beginning with Super Mario Brothers 2 and Super Mario World predominantly. I was always familiar with the original and 3, but it was really those two, Super Mario Brothers 2 and World, that I grew up with. And those are usually the ones that I feel people consider them to be the black sheep of the series. SMB2, as most people know by now, is essentially a retrofitted title that wasn't originally a Super Mario Brothers game. Well, the World introduced Yoshi and all these other mechanics. And so it was just, I feel, a different way to be introduced to the series that might have given me a different perspective once I finally saw the film. So, I was a bit younger than a lot of people who had probably been playing it for 5-6 years since, it came out in the 80s.
Do you think the movie is good, or do you think it's just a fun thing to watch?
That's where the argument stands, isn't it? Is it good, or is it just so bad it's good? What about it really stands out? And I think that really depends on your taste. Mm-hmm. For me in particular, I recognize its flaws. I know that the pacing is off, the acting is uneven, the dialogue is sometimes really cheesy, and, well, on top of all of that, as an adaptation, what does it really say to the games? So there's so many areas you can criticize it, but for me personally, I feel that there are enough elements that come together that you can appreciate it for what it was trying to do and what it not necessarily accomplished, but what it managed to piece together by the end of it. There's things you can appreciate and enjoy.
Do you think that you have put more thought and mental effort into this movie than the people who originally created it?
I don't want to question where they were coming from because, I enjoy movies. I've watched them all the time, but it wasn't until this particular film and interviewing people who were involved in the industry that I got a better sense of what it takes to make a film, especially in that pre-digital, pre-CG era. Mm-hmm. So for what everyone gave towards it, I felt that they felt they were honestly making a blockbuster, and I don't really hold anything against them. It was just, when it's a collaborative project of that nature, it's always going to be an issue of too many cooks, and sometimes you just need the right way, the recipe just wasn't there. And in the sense of the script, it wasn't there. So
Yeah, that's something that they talk about with the Matrix. Like Will Smith read the script and was like, "Oh, this is dumb. This isn't going to work out." And so he passed on it, and Keanu Reeves took it, and it turned into, this giant thing. And then what was the next one? Not the next one, but the why can't I remember the name of it now? Not Cloud Atlas, but the one with Mila Kunis. You know what I'm talking about?
is it Jupiter Rising?
Jupiter Ascending. Yeah.
Yeah, Jupiter Ascending.
They got a ton of people on board for that one because they're like, oh, well, the Wachowskis know what they're doing. They made The Matrix. This is going to be another great thing. And it, fell flat on its face. So there's not really a good way to know what's going to be good or what's going to be worth making until after it's all put together.
Oh, totally.
Even Tom Hardy hated working on, Mad Max Fury Road until he saw it. He was like, oh no, that was completely worth it. So I can see how, Bob Hoskins and, all the people involved were like trusting that it was going to be good and how it could take a turn like it did. But it's it's an interesting movie. It's, I don't know. Did you have a chance to listen to the podcast me and Taylor did on it?
Yeah, I did.
So what was your opinion about that? Did we get a ton of stuff wrong?
I don't really feel like you did get much wrong. Didn't you say, I think you guys might have said something about you felt that the script probably was an unrelated thing.
Yeah,
they just slapped like the Mario name on it.
Yes. I believe that's true. Is it not? It was, originally supposed to be a dinosaur movie, like unrelated to Mario completely. And then they decided like, well, let's make this Mario. And that's why nothing really seemed to fit with the game.
I think it was more, well, what had happened was that, Leitmotiv, this essentially an independent studio, had gotten the rights to the film. And they did have a fantasy script that was fairly faithful to the tone of the games at the time. It was presented at how you might expect a Super Mario Brothers film to be made. Very like a Jim Henson-y stop motion adventure down this brick road fantasy world. But they had issues with the director that they had settled on at the time, Greg Beeman, who put out this film called Mom and Dad Save the World, and it wasn't received well, and it didn't really make a lot of money. So the producers panicked and didn't think he could handle the job for this big title that they had landed, Super Mario Brothers, and they fired him after they had already, settled on this script and everything. But they realized that they couldn't get a replacement, and this is the part of the story where you sometimes hear like Dustin Hoffman was offered the role of Mario, or Harold Ramis of Ghostbusters was offered the chance to direct it, and he turned it down. And I'm like, okay, great. He turned down that Blade Runner-esque sci-fi take. That would have been terrible. But in actuality, the producers offered all of these people the chance to continue the original fantasy vision, but no one wanted to. And by the time they got to Rocky and Annabelle, the husband and wife duo who would direct it, it was well over a year later. And after they had already gotten all these denials from potential replacements, Rocky and Annabelle said, we'll take on the project, but we don't like the fantasy angle. We have this new concept that we want to bring to it. So you could say that essentially they might have had this concept in the back of their heads when the opportunity to do Super Mario Brothers came around. But I think it's a little bit more like they saw this material and they were just so inspired that they're like, no, it has to be our vision. It has to be our take. We want to put our touch on it that we know other people won't do, because everyone's going to do a fantasy version of this script. It's too obvious. But we want to bring in dinosaurs and parallel dimensions, and you'll really have to think about it. And that was kind of how they approached it, as they wanted to take the material that was there, but deconstruct it and put it back together in their own way.
Yeah. So what from the game stuck, right? You have their plumbers, and then you have people's names. They don't even use Peach. They use Daisy, who at the time, was she even a character?
Yeah, at the time they had just come out with Super Mario Land.
Okay.
And that was like the one game where Mario goes and rescues another princess. But at the time, most people didn't really realize that there was a separate princess thing. They're like, okay, is Daisy and Toadstool the same character? And a lot of people were saying Princess Daisy Toadstool. So the production got these two different names, and they're like, we have two female names. Let's go with the one that sounds vaguely humanesque. And it wasn't until, the film came out in 93, and then Super Mario 64 came out like a couple of years after that. I believe it was 96. And that's when the US marketing started really switching over from Toadstool to Peach.
Gotcha. So what else in the movie transferred over from the game? Because if the characters didn't have the overalls and didn't have the names, would there be anything really to point it out as being a Mario movie? Obviously, other than the title of the movie.
Yeah, and I think this is where you get into where a lot of people say, oh, the games didn't have a story. There wasn't really a narrative to work with, so whatever they did was going to have to infuse some original interpretation for the characters of the story. And I can sort of see where people are coming from in that regard, but I don't agree. I think the games, while they didn't, have the character has this particular motivation and this childhood, and they struggle from point A to point B, and then finally they rescue the princess. Those details obviously aren't there, but there's still this narrative. There's this arc where it's as simple as you start at the left side of the screen and you move right and you get to the princess. And I think you can boil that down to these simple archetypes of Mario's the hero, and there's the princess, and then there's these simple obstacles in the middle of the way. And it speaks to itself as, the classic narrative of a damsel in distress having to be rescued. And that is translated to the film. They have to rescue a princess. What more is that? Well, what more is the Super Mario Brothers is that they're brothers. There's two of them. You have to have these separate individual characterizations. Otherwise, they're two middle-aged Italian guys talking about how they like lasagna. And that's really where I felt that they found the voice of the film, is when they realized that they had to instill the proper struggle between Mario and Luigi. They had to overcome something to truly see how they were brothers. And that is what I feel they took from the games, is just that, that depth of brotherhood.
Bob Hoskins and John Leguizamo, they were drunk the entire time, right? Is that true? Do you know?
Leguizamo has said that in his autobiography that they were drinking, and others have commented on it. But when we spoke to them, they said, oh no, we didn't drink, on set. We didn't go to set drunk or get to set and start drinking. They would put in their time. They worked as professionally as they could. But Wilmington, North Carolina, where they shot it, was, this beach town. So they would just party every night on these beach houses, and they would party and drink and play pool and everything all night. And yeah, they would come to work the next day hungover sometimes, but they were very adamant that they would never actually drink while they were there and that they weren't drunk on set.
Yeah.
But, it's still, I think that's splitting hairs.
Yeah.
They were still drinking. It was still a bad experience. I don't want to deny that, but it wasn't in the sense that they didn't respect the people they were working with. They totally respected everyone that they were working with and tried to put in their best efforts to bringing something together. But they were totally blowing off steam after the fact once everything had wrapped.
What's your favorite part of this movie?
It's so hard to say, but I definitely love the take of a parallel dimension where these humanoid dinosaurs have evolved into still looking like humans. It reads like a Twilight Zone episode, and that's how they set it up with this fictional show, The Miraculous World, that Luigi's watching. It's just perfectly set up as this bizarro cover story of the National Enquirer. And I think it's hard to deny that that's where they were coming from. Because it starts out with this brilliant scene of this woman in a vaguely religious habit running through the streets of Brooklyn in the rain, pounding on this cathedral. She leaves this mysterious egg, and then the nuns come out and they bring the egg in, and it hatches into a human being. It's like this juxtaposition of a dinosaur egg hatching a human being and the cathedral, like all these different religious motifs. It's just so in your face that it's hard to deny that they were trying to elevate the material in a way. Like, it's Super Mario Brothers, and they're like, this is our project. We will elevate this into this grand artistic statement, and we're going to start it with a dinosaur egg hatching a baby in a Catholic cathedral. It's so over the top. That's what I love about it. It's just so over the top, but at the same time, it takes itself seriously, but at the same time, it doesn't. Like, and that's where, the tonal confusion comes from, is what is it trying to be? Is it a children's movie? Is it for teenagers? Is it for adults who grew up with video games? But that doesn't make any sense because video games weren't even old enough by the time this movie came out for it to speak to that generation. But it's almost what they were trying to do. They were trying to do, are you familiar with Watchmen?
Yes.
They have this, great moment where they're, juxtapositioning, the superhero shenanigans of all the main characters with just this kid on the street corner reading a comic book. And they didn't put this in the movie, but in the very first page of the earlier draft of the script, they had a similar moment where Mario and Luigi are driving down the streets of Brooklyn, and you see Mario Brothers plumbing, and then as they drive by, there's a kid on the corner playing a Game Boy, and that was their Watchmen moment. That was them trying to say that this is a meta interpretation of what video games mean to pop culture. But that message got completely muddled, and they ended up with the Miraculous World segment that doesn't exactly have the same homage that Watchmen was going for.
Yeah. Is Mario, Luigi Mario, is that based on the game, or is that just because it's called Mario Brothers that they felt like they needed to give them the last name Mario?
Well, there had been a scattered few references before to them having that kind of name. Nothing official. It was just third-party advertisements. I believe the Super Show might have made that kind of joke once. But it had been done before, but by the time they were writing the film, I think they sort of just independently came to the same conclusion that it was a funny joke.
Yeah. Cause that, even as a kid, that bothered me so much. It drove me crazy to think of someone naming their child Mario.
Well, nowadays you have people arguing the opposite point that they are the Mario brothers, but it's Super Mario and Luigi Mario. That Mario's first name is Super and his last name Mario, and it's like, so it just gets back to the point: what does the Mario brothers mean? And it's either their last name's Mario, or you go back to like the landlord of the Nintendo headquarters was Segali. You could say they're Mario and Luigi Segali. But they were just, I don't know, they just wanted to make a joke.
Yeah. What's something you think people miss when they watch this movie? Like, they don't have the background knowledge to actually appreciate.
One thing that is easy to miss is the Goombas themselves. A lot of people comment on the fact that the Goomba are just essentially these 7-foot tall, pin-headed foot soldiers, and they feel that doesn't relate to how they're depicted in the games, which is these very squat figures. And I actually feel that their height is true to the games in the sense that in the original Super Mario Bros. 1, and then also in the third one, and then in World, regular Mario is half the size of Goomba in the terms of pixels on this screen. And then when you get a mushroom and you become like Super Mario, he's equal in height to Goombas in terms of pixels on the screen. So for the writers who were playing the games, for reference and inspiration, they saw these monsters and they're like, okay, well, based off of the screen, pixel-wise, they look like they're the same height. These Goombas might be massive. And so that's where they derived that from. And we ended up going back and doing some research, and there's no promotional material from Nintendo at the time featuring a Goomba and either Mario and Luigi side by side where you can really compare their height with each other. So you really only had the games and the pixels to compare with. And building upon that, Super Mario Bros. 3, where the main thrust of the game is not that the princess has been kidnapped by Bowser once again, but that there are all these separate kings from these different lands that Bowser has used dark magic to transform into different animals. Well, in the later releases, they changed it to Mario enemies. But in the original release, it was just random animals. So you have to turn them back into their humanoid form. And that's where you get the plot in the film where the first victim of President Koopa's de-evolution machine is the former king, King Reznor. He was transformed into this giant ball of fungus that ends up covering the whole city. And then Bowser or Koopa goes on to de-evolve the rest of the citizens into Goomba, which is, very true to the instruction manual, and the plot of Super Mario Bros. 3. So I think those together really informs how, the screen developers could perceive the Goombas as something like they did.
Yeah, that makes sense. The only thing I would say against that is that the Goombas and the mushrooms are the exact same size in the game.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. So, so it's really all about just graphical limitations and stylization.
Yeah.
So they could have said, "Oh wait, these mushrooms are too big; it doesn't match." But that you caught me. You caught me. I'm trying to justify something in the movie where you're like, "No, I'm not buying that."
Yeah, this movie is crazy. The whole thing. It's it's fun. It's funny. It's fun to watch, but it's bonkers. Like the whole, everything about it. There's nothing that's really grounded, in reality. Like even their lives in reality before they cross over. It's not supposed to be, obviously. It's, it's supposed to just be fun, but it's funny. I don't know.
I think, and this kind of ties into a lot of what I said earlier when I was going into them trying to be meta and do like a Watchmen thing, is that the husband part of the directors, Rocky Morton, he said that his goal was to do like a Batman 89 type of thing, where Tim Burton came in and just utterly deconstructed the Batman franchise and kind of darkened it again and brought it back to a new audience.
Yeah.
And I think that's a fair thing to do, but the difference is that Batman had this whole history behind him, and he initially started out as this dark, nowhere character and evolved into this goofy version. So it made sense to bring him back. Whereas video games were still very young, and Mario Brothers as a character were even younger. So coming in and saying, oh, I'm going to deconstruct video games and Super Mario Brothers, just like Tim Burton did with Batman and superheroes, it definitely is over their head, and it was a little presumptuous because it just wasn't there to speak to itself. In retrospect, you can say, oh yeah, I know what they were trying to do, but it just wasn't the time to make those statements, and people wanted a more direct adaptation.
Do you think it would have been better if they would have gone darker, or better if they would have gone lighter? Like, which direction do you think they overshot or undershot? Cause it's in the middle, right? Like it's kind of fun and goofy, but they're trying to be like dark and gritty at the same time. And you can't really do that together. So do you think the movie would have serviced to be more dark and more intense, or more kid friendly and less intense?
For the version that they had made, they should have gone a little darker, a little edgier. And that was their intention, was they wanted to reach out to young adults and adolescents who they felt had been playing video games for a few years. They wanted to reach out to them, but the script that they had developed with the writers and that Bob Hoskins and all the other actors had signed on to, the producers threw it out like 10 days before shooting. They decided this script is too dark. We need to lighten it up. And by this point, they had already built like all the sets. They had already designed all the costumes and all the props and everything. And Rocky Morton, the director, had storyboarded meticulously the entire film, and put them on these wheelied easels so he can just wheel them around on set to show everybody. But then the producers tossed out the script, hired a new script doctor, and didn't allow the directors to work with him because they felt that the directors would make the process too long. So they hired this new writer who dumbed it down a lot. They cut out a lot of things, and it was a half measure. Like, you can't take the vision that they had, which is specifically aimed at teenagers and is trying to make a meta interpretation of video games and Super Mario Brothers. You can't dumb that down because, I mean, the premise in itself is under the presumption that people who are going to watch the movie are intelligent and they want to get that kind of thing. But if you treat your audiences like idiots, and that's what they did with that animated intro in the very beginning with the dinosaurs talking, is they treated their audience like idiots. When you do that, then any message you're trying to make is not going to get across. So they had this new script, and all the sets and everything they had already built, and they're like, okay, we have to basically recreate the movie we wanted to make with everything we already made, but with this new script that nobody likes. So if they were to have made a more kid-friendly version, it should have just been the original fantasy version, where it's straight up puppets and mushrooms and like Wizard of Oz.
Yeah, Have you seen the original script?
Yeah, I've read it. We have all those scripts on our website.
Oh, okay. What is it? You
Check
think?
any of them out?
I haven't seen them yet. No, I have seen the website, but I haven't read any of the scripts. But what do you? Sorry.
It's funny, like just a couple of weeks ago, someone, I'm not familiar with them, but I assume they're famous or semi-famous. Their username is like Vinny, and they did like a Vine Sauce reading of that original script, and it got like 500,000 people watching it on YouTube. It was like, okay, great. We got a bunch of people going to our site just to read that original fantasy script that this guy was making fun of in voices.
Yeah.
So it's interesting how people sort of attach themselves to this original fantasy script more to the original version. Like, they don't care that there were versions of the adult Blade Runner-esque dinosaur script that are good. They just want the fantasy version. So for a lot of people, it doesn't really matter how good the version we got ever could have been. It doesn't matter what the message would have been or what they were trying to deconstruct. People just want that fantasy version. And that original script, I think that did speak to what people would have wanted. It had a similar setup. Mario and Luigi start in Brooklyn. They don't necessarily get along. But then they get dragged into this other world that is purely fantasy. There's no sci-fi elements. Koopa is a dinosaur-esque character, and they had all this concept art made up of Arnold Schwarzenegger, if you were in this, like, Bowser getup, because that's who they wanted. They had wanted Arnold Schwarzenegger as Koopa, and either Michael Keaton or Danny DeVito as Mario. They also wanted Michael Keaton as Bowser. They didn't really care, but essentially it would have been anyone who would have been in Batman '89. That's who they wanted, because they wanted to have the same feel. But the princess in that version, her name was Hildy.
Okay.
Like short for Hildegard. And that's not drawn from the games.
Yeah.
We did interview the people who wrote that fantasy script. They're more famous for writing the scripts for Richie Rich, the live-action Richie Rich, and the live-action Stones. But these days they have a semi-popular series of young adult books called Rune Warriors, which is like based on Norse and like Scandinavian, Northern European lore, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So that's just where they were drawing that from. They liked that kind of culture, so they're like, we'll name the princess Hildy.
What do you prefer? Do you like that script?
There's things I like about it, but it just didn't come together in the same way as the best version of the sci-fi script did. So like Toad is in it, and he's throughout the entire script. I like that. I want Toad there the whole time. That's one of my main complaints about the movie, is Toad gets de-evolved and you don't really see him anymore.
Yeah.
Wasted opportunity. But in the original script, Toad is there the whole time. Yoshi is there, but it's much more of a cameo than it is in the sci-fi version. It's kind of like Mama Luigi, actually. They come across an egg, it hatches, and they're like, and it's Yoshi, and he thinks that Mario and Luigi are his mother. But then you never see him again. So it's like, what's the point of that? The ending is good, though. Luigi tricks Koopa into essentially growing larger and larger using dark magic until the magic crown that is on his head falls off and he can't use it anymore. He instantly shrinks back to normal size and falls into lava. So like Luigi defeated him using a riddle that he had read earlier in the story in like a fairy tale book. And so I liked that they were drawing from like fairy tale motifs in that sense. But then they also have other elements like Mario interacts with this ugly old woman. Like she's just described as an ugly, obese woman, like a hag. Like she's just there. She laughs at Mario and Luigi, doesn't really do anything. But then at the very end of the script, she shows up again and she's like, there was a curse on me. I'm actually a beautiful woman. And then Mario and her end up getting married. And it's like, well, where did that come from?
Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah, so there's a lot of really good elements I felt people would have liked and would have been true to the games and that fairy tale feeling. But there were other elements that were just dated. Like it just would have felt like another era that had gone by. Like it just too kidsy,
Yeah.
kid friendly in those regards.
Yeah. What do you think, do you think they were actually trying to make a part 2, or do you think the end was just something they threw in there?
Well, according to the writer, he said that they just threw it in as a reference to the ending of Back to the Future, where Doc Brown comes back and he's like, it's your kids. But they didn't really plan to do a sequel. It was more of the adventure continues type of thing.
Yeah.
But when they realized that Back to the Future was such a huge hit and they did make a sequel, they had that really structurally weak first act of Back to the Future 2, where his girlfriend, Marty's girlfriend, is like passed out the whole time. Like they're like, okay, she's there at the end of the first movie, so we have to have her now, but we don't really know what to do with her. So they spend like the first 20, 30 minutes just having her passed out, doing nothing until they can move on to other adventures with Marty. So it was the same thing with Super Mario Brothers. So like they just wanted to put something in there that conveyed, and the adventure continues. But if they actually did do a sequel, I feel like they probably would have been trapped in the same way as Back to the Future. They're like, okay, we didn't mean to write the sequel hook that way, but now we have to figure out what Daisy wanted to do, because according to the writer, they had no idea. Like, she comes back, she says, you're never going to believe this, and they didn't even know. It was just a vague sense of, and the adventure continues.
Gotcha. What, in your head, if they made a part 2, what would you like to see? Or would you rather not see it at all?
Well, I've thought about it a lot, and, you know, there are fans of the film, and that's kind of the big question is, what would they have done? How could you possibly follow it up? And, you know, there's a lot of material in the earlier scripts that they cut out, and based off of what they do with films these days is they cut out a lot of things and they sort of bring those elements back in the later ones. I think they probably would have tried to do that, because a big theme of the script was that this parallel world was dying. There's no vegetation, the water's dirty, they just can't survive without merging into our world. And what happens is Daisy ends up using like the power of the meteor to like use the radiation to bring a bunch of vegetation and stuff from our world over to theirs. And it's like, look, it's like a lush jungle now. And so it was supposed to end with this like vast, like jungle, primordial jungle with dragonflies and everything. And that would have set up the part 2, where it's a bit more like the games and, you know, it's a bit more, like this fantasy world. But since they didn't really get to do that at the end of the first one, and it's still very much a dying fungus-covered wasteland, they probably would have made the plot of the second one, you know, trying to save it, trying to bring back that life and that vegetation, so that by the third one, if they were to make one, the third one would feature that lush jungle that they originally intended to have in the second one.
Yeah, I don't even know. Like, if the original is so bad that it's fun, and you can't recreate that again. You know what I mean? Like, if you try to do that, you're gonna fall flat on your face. if you make a good movie, then it kind of ruins the fun of the original, you know, like,
Yeah.
I don't know. It's interesting. But, can you tell me about your website again? Where can people find it?
Oh yeah, it's smbmovie.com. And it's been up since 2007. We started out with just collecting memorabilia, like the scripts, toys, that kind of thing, just getting all the information together. Then we moved into contacting people who had worked on the film and doing interviews. And that just steamrolled into doing a 20th anniversary screening, a few years ago. And then after that, in 2014, was when we were actually contacted by a distribution company in the UK, who brings cult, horror and sci-fi films to Blu-ray. And they're like, we're bringing Super Mario Brothers to Blu-ray. Can you help us out? And we're like, that's the dream. That's what we've been trying to do. So we worked with them on producing the Blu-ray. So we got like everyone we had interviewed already and got them to sit down to do like a new documentary. And then we got all the material that we had collected, like storyboards, concept art, and got that all on the bonus features. So that came out in 2014. And unfortunately, it was only Region 2, so like you could only play it on a UK player. But the year after that, 2015, we got contacted by another distributor who, well, they were just taking the same material that Second Sight Films had used, but they were putting it in a limited edition steelbook. So that came out in 2015 with like original artwork that was done, to, celebrate the cult feel of the film. It's like got all the elements on the front, the neon lighting, the crystal, and it just better, presents the film and what it's all about than a lot of the earlier cover art. And then this year we got contacted again that there's a Japanese Blu-ray coming out. We're not working with them on that directly. They're just using the same material that's already available. But that will be Region 1. So if you're like in America or you have a Region 1 player, you can finally play the movie, but on a Japanese Blu-ray.
Cool, man. Well, thanks for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Oh yeah, no problem. It was great being able to talk about the movie.